Good morning. Welcome. I'm Karen Jacobs. I'm the director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute here at Sonoma State, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our winter course preview. After all that our region has endured in the last couple of months, many of you have expressed to me how happy you are to be back at Ollie, and that this is in fact a compass for you that things may be returning to relative normal. And that means a great deal to me. We have supported each other through transition and through loss, and we come together now with the dual missions of intellectual curiosity and community building, and that's what Ollie is all about. So this term, we will look at multiple art forms, multiple geographies. We will move from the imagination of mythology to the realities of aging, and I think it's really one of our best catalogs yet, and I hope you agree with me. We have one substitution that I have to mention. Unfortunately, Douglas Lee was not able to teach his course on China this term. He will be teaching it next year, so we have that to look forward to. But we have an 11th hour substitution for which I am indebted and very grateful. Mike Arnold, who is a known quantity to Ollie, he's taught for us before. He'll be offering a class on the Bay Area economy with some reference to things that may not have been true a couple of months ago that are true now. So it's a very timely class. I'm very grateful to him for stepping in, and he'll be here today to tell you about that. I also want to invite you to attend our open house course preview at the Oakmont campus on Wednesday at 3 o'clock. Those classes are open to anyone, and we have 3 different classes happening there. And for those of, how many of you have taken classes at the Oakmont campus? Many of you, great. So I want to remind you that you have options. You have Sonoma State main campus, and you have Oakmont. And back by popular demand in the spring, next term, will be our one-off 2-hour lecture series at the Glaser Center in Santa Rosa. How many of you took advantage of that in the fall? Great. So we had to curtail that series with the fires, but we will be bringing that back by popular demand, in fact, extending it to an 8-week series of one-off classes in the spring. So we're growing. So now back to the present moment. The way this works today, as many of you know, each of the faculty will have 5 minutes to pitch their courses to you, a very discerning audience. And I will, depending on my mood, keep people on track time-wise by either gently tapping them on the shoulder or not so gently nudging them off the stage. Some of you have seen this routine before, and it's not new to you. I will be as diplomatic as I can to keep us on schedule. So those of you who have been with Ollie since its inception know the value of this program, both collectively and individually. May I see a show of hands of those of you who have been with us since 2001. Wonderful. Okay. Loyalty. How about for the last 5 years? Huge number of hands. Wonderful. And even more importantly, perhaps, how many of you are here for the first time today? Welcome. You are part of a large family of Ollie students, not only here at Sonoma State, but around the country. There are 150,000 older adults who take advantage of these classes on 120 campuses all over the U.S., and we're delighted to expand that family here at Sonoma State. So one of our board members likes to say, we'll soon have you drinking the Kool-Aid, as the rest of us are. And I had many of you come in today and say you brought friends for the first time, and I think it won't be long before they become groupies of this program. So without further ado, we're going to start the presentations in the order in which they are in the catalog, again with the one substitution that I mentioned. And I will be on the sidelines, keeping an eye on the time as unobtrusively as possible. So let's get started with our first day of the week, which I would say is really our Humanities Day. There are themes to the days somehow this term that worked out rather nicely. And we will start in the humanities with Vic Liptak and Architecture Now.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here. I have to do two things. I have to start my timer so I don't go over. And thank you very much for getting that set up. So this course is Architecture Now, Trends, Triumphs, and a Few Terrible Ideas. And my objective in these 5 minutes is to get you to think about architecture in new ways and to ignite your desire to know more about architecture. The course does the same as we survey and discuss contemporary architecture in reference to architecture traditions, and it asks us to consider whether architecture still matters and why. This morning, I'll ID the slides. There's a lot of them. They're meant to pique your interest and curiosity. Obviously, in the course, we'll move more slowly and go certainly talk in greater depth. So thinking about architecture in new ways, we'll start with something ancient, the Parthenon in Athens, Greece, from around the 5th century BC. Have you ever found yourself thinking when you arrive at a place or you enter a space, this is great, this is beautiful, or awesome, or awful? And this is also the Parthenon in Nashville, Tennessee, a full-scale replica built in 1897. What should we care about in architecture? Vitruvius, a Roman engineer, architect, and author, wrote the first known volume on architecture in the 1st century BC, just after the Pantheon was finished in Rome. And he suggested that we focus on utilitas, firmitas, and venustas, or, in English, commodity, firmness, and delight. And this is a detail of the entryway to the Cathedral of Our Lady of Angels in Los Angeles from 2002. So, commodity. Commodity not in the economic sense, but in the abstract sense. Does the architecture serve its purpose well? This is Machu Picchu. You probably recognize it, built on a mountain ridge in Peru around the 1400s. What were its original purposes, and what is its current purpose? These are questions we'll be asking. This is the New Bern Volunteer Fire Department and Town Hall in a very small town in Alabama, built in 2004. It was the first new public building in town in 110 years. It was designed and built by architecture students. Does anybody recognize this? Yes, this is the Green Music Center, Veal Hall. It's right here on campus, built in 2012. And it does have multiple purposes, and you might think about what those are. Firmness. Firmness asks whether architecture appropriately resists natural and human forces. This is a stairway in the Ihlara Valley in Cappadocia, Turkey. That valley has 105 churches carved into volcanic rock, dating from between 700 and 1000 AD. Moving forward a bit, this is the Aqua Tower in Chicago, built in 2008. And speaking about resisting forces, the balconies break up wind forces. They also provide shade for energy efficiency, and they reduce bird collisions. From the same year, 2008, we have the Millennium Tower in San Francisco. It has a little problem with the natural force of gravity. Delight. Does the architecture help you appreciate being human and appreciate what humans can do? This is called the Blur Building. It's not much of a building, it's mostly a blur. It's from the Swiss Expo 2002. This is the cardboard cathedral built post-earthquake in 2013 in Christchurch, New Zealand, and it is made of cardboard. These next two examples are local. This is the Ramirez House at Sea Ranch on the Sonoma coast, built in 2014. And the Dominus Winery in, is it Yountville or Yountville? Does anybody know? Yountville, California, 1996. And a detail of that, this is a gabion wall. Has anybody been to the Dominus? It's extraordinary. So the gabion wall does an amazing stuff with air movement and heat control, but it does something really extraordinary with light. So I'm going to leave you with that, and I hope with an interest in looking at architecture in new ways, observing and wondering about commodity, firmness, and delight, and a desire to know more. Thank you.
So our next speaker is not here in person today, but is no stranger to many of you, and she's made a video. How many of you taken classes with Heidi Chrétien? Okay, so my thanks to Phil Harriman for helping Heidi make this video, which I think will get across exactly what she is intending to do in her course on mythology, Twice Told Tales.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to a winter session for the OLLI program. My name is Heidi Chrétien. Many of you know me, some of you don't, but I'm sure we will get to know each other very, very soon. So, over the years of my teaching with OLLI, we've encountered the subject taken from classical mythology. We've seen this in paintings, we've seen it in literature, in sculpture, etc. And last year, someone finally said, why don't you teach a course on mythology? We could all use a refresher. So, I'm answering your call, and here we have Twice Told Tales, Classical Mythology and Modern Life. Why do I call it and modern life? Because the tales from ancient mythology resonate over and over again in our current life situations. We see these in films, we see it in video games, we see it in our current psychological understandings. In other words, remnants of classical mythology are all around us. Am I going to ask you to go and play video games? No. But we will be looking at the stories from classical mythology, essentially Greece and Rome, which is what I know best. So, we all love good stories. Some of us are better storytellers, some of us are better story listeners. The Greeks and the Romans were wonderful storytellers. So, why are these important for us today? Because they resonate in all aspects of our Western culture. After all, we don't call it the Oedipus complex for nothing. So, what are the topics we're going to be looking at, and how do we apply these stories to contemporary life? They primarily come into the study of women's situations. Many of our preconceived archetypes come from classical mythology. The Greeks taught us so much, and all the things they taught us, I'm going to be addressing in this class. Topics such as, and I'll go right from the start, moving chronologically, creation myths. What did the Greeks tell us about their notions of creation? What still resonates for us today? The Greeks taught us about personality types, and these come through as we look at the characters and personalities of the individual gods, goddesses, demigods, etc., etc. What else did they teach us? They taught us how to fall in love, and we will see these myths replayed over and over. It tells us a great deal about what the Greeks thought about gender relationships. They taught us about mother-daughter relationships in the stories of Demeter and Persephone. They taught us how to go to war with stories from the Trojan War. They taught us how to be a self-made man, i.e. Heracles and his many, many labors. They taught us virtually everything we know about today's life. And what just occurred to me in the last few days, especially as I've returned to Sonoma County and listened to people's stories of how they got through the fires, etc., etc., I thought I would take a page from my dear friend Fran Claggett's memoir classes, and what I'd like to do at the latter part of each of our 6 classes, I'd like the students to be able to sit for a few moments and reflect upon what their personal stories are. We don't need to share them with each other unless you'd like to, but what was your mother-daughter relationship? What do you feel are the stories surrounding your creation? So this is going to be an exploration, classical mythology and modern life. It will be held on Monday afternoons, and I'm hoping to see all of you there. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry I'm not here to join you today, but I'm getting a nice new shiny knee. So see you soon. Bye. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to winter session.
Okay, I'm glad Heidi stayed on schedule because I wasn't sure how I was going to get her off the stage. So, before we leave our Humanities Day, I want to make a quick announcement that seems to fit here thematically in the humanities. After lobbying very strongly with the new director of the Green Music Center, I am happy to announce that every show in Weil Hall for the remainder of the academic year, OLLI students will receive a 10% discount across the board, whether you buy tickets in person or if you buy them online. There's a place for a code, and the code is OLLI, O-L-L-I. So that is a new development. I'd love it to be a 50% discount. They didn't go for that. But it's not bad, and I hope that you'll all take advantage of that. Okay, moving to Tuesdays, and what I'm going to call generically our Topical Issues Day. We will get to the Bay Area economics class in a minute, but we have a class that is probably more topical now than when it was first conceived on Korea. And before I introduce the instructor, I would like to thank Jean McNeil, who sponsored this class. Jean, where are you? I'm going to embarrass you. Somewhere. In the back, of course. Jean thought that Korea would be a great topical course for someone with Perry's know-how in Asian history and linking it to modern day to teach. He has constructed the class, and I'm very thankful to Jean for making it possible. If any of you have an idea for a class that you'd like to sponsor, or you have an instructor for whom you would take anything that they taught and you just want to bring them back, I'm always open to having those conversations, and sponsoring a course is always an option. So thank you, Jean. And it gives me great pleasure to bring back someone who has been on a bit of a hiatus from OLLI, and someone that I think many of you will be delighted to see again, and I hope the beginning of another extended run with us, our friend Perry Rittenauer.
Well, good morning, and wonderful to see everyone here today. We're going to be talking today about Korea, nuclear nightmare, or peaceful unification. Talk about a hot topic, huh? This is a class about modern Korea and its efforts to reunify the Korean peninsula through peace or war. It will also cover the wider global implications of this reunification effort that brings the involvement of the United States, China, Russia, and Korea's other Asian neighbors into the struggle between North and South Korea to achieve political and strategic supremacy over a reunified peninsula. Where the unification comes about through conflict or diplomacy, the landscape of Northeast Asia may soon be dramatically altered, perhaps with a great loss of life in the event of war. What the role of the United States and China will play in helping to manage successfully a peaceful unification is one of the topics that we'll be discussing in this class. Let's take a brief look at a few slides to summarize this situation. This is the basic split between North and South Korea, two different regimes, two different flags, two different nation states. This is what the Korean Peninsula looks like geographically. It's a little bit larger than many people imagine, quite a bit of land mass, particularly in the north, but it's a very interesting and a very strategically located geographic position. This is Korea at night. I don't know if this will work, but if you can see up here, this area up here is North Korea. There is no light. This is South Korea. You can see the difference in terms of industrial and economic development in North Korea, which is almost non-existent, versus South Korea, which is a vibrant nation state and a very important member of the global community. This is what South Korea believes should be the unification theme. Everybody gets together and everybody's happy and everybody joyfully dances, and there are no hard feelings among North and South. This is what the North thinks about that idea. Ever since the split between North and South, North Korea has consistently rebuffed, for the most part, any outreach from South Korea to achieve any kind of unification. This is Kim Jong-un, the current leader of North Korea, and his artillery pieces. This is a little bit facetious, but he has a very serious number of artillery pieces aimed at his neighbors in South Korea. China, which is a neighbor for Korea, is desperate to try and hold these two squabbling siblings apart because of the fear of a reunified peninsula and what it might mean for China. And then we have South Korea's major ally, the United States, with its THAAD missiles, which is anti-ballistic missiles, as well as its war games, which are now going on in South Korea, and which upset North Korea to a great deal. We might call this potential conflict the hair war. I like this slide the best. It was a good one. Hopefully it won't come to that. In any event, this is a really serious subject, and to conclude, this is not a class about the United States and North Korea and the potential war between us. Rather, we're going to explore the issues from a Korean perspective while recognizing that other countries and allies, China and the United States, have strong stakes in the outcome. This question of Korean unification has been around for over 70 years, since the end of World War II. Today, it's China whose influence largely determines what will happen in the Korean Peninsula. And now the United States finds itself under a potential nuclear missile threat from North Korea, not seen since the demise of the Soviet Union. I hope you'll join us as we explore this critical challenge to peace and security in Northeast Asia. I look forward to seeing you on Tuesdays at 9:30. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so now instead of Douglas Lee, as I mentioned, we bring back somebody who has taught not only for us here at Sonoma State, but taught this course for Ollie at Dominican to great acclaim. And again, very happy he was able and willing to do this. Mike Arnold.
Thanks very much. Uh-oh. This way?
I believe so. Yes.
That works. Good. So this is a 6-week course talking about the nature of a regional economy called the 9-county Bay Area economy. And to understand what this is about, we're going to cover the macroeconomic influences, the international trade influences, the structural influences on the Bay Area economy, and then we're going to end up on 2 lectures, one having to do with the #1 challenge that I'm sure all of us experience, called traffic congestion. Why do we have it? What is that really about? And how do economists explain it? And what is that really about? And then finally ending up on managing growth, there's something out there called Plan Bay Area, and what that's about is, of course, about the housing shortage in the 9 counties. It's not just Sonoma County, it's everywhere across the Bay Area. To talk about regional economies, you're really talking about 3 things in terms of why they grow. First, economic fluctuations. This is what garners the attention of the media and the press, and it is largely being determined in Washington, D.C. in terms of the macroeconomic influences of the Federal Reserve Board and Congress. But there are also long-run issues, too, influencing the Bay. Why is it that the Bay Area economy has been growing faster than the U.S. economy, and why are our wages here higher? What is it about the Bay Area economy such that it is growing faster? And then the third influence is about technological or structural change. And one of the things to recognize about a regional economy is we are highly influenced by technological change. And I'm not talking about Apple. I am talking about the technological change occurring on the planet in terms of how it restructures the industry, about where goods and services are being produced, and how it is that the Bay Area has positioned itself over time to take advantage of many structural changes, making this one of the most vibrant economies, certainly in metropolitan areas on the planet. Uh-oh, wrong button. Here's an example of how correlated in terms of the Bay Area economy is, and I didn't put Sonoma County there, but the unemployment rate in Sonoma County lies right on top of these lines. And what you find is the swings in unemployment and inflation are not being determined locally. They are being determined by macroeconomic policies, not by local policies, despite what local politicians will say about what they've done regarding employment or non-employment. They really don't have a whole lot of influence on this, and the data shows that. Similarly, they don't determine the inflation rate. The 2 lines you're seeing here is the inflation rate in the United States versus the inflation rate in California, and they literally lie on top of each other because they're largely being determined by a group of 12 people sitting in a room in Washington, D.C. called the Federal Open Market Committee, and they're making decisions about interest rates, and they have been targeting inflation for the last 20 years, and it is wildly successful. It is one of the most successful macroeconomic policies in the history of macroeconomics, and it is why roughly the inflation rate's a little over 2%. On the other hand, if you look locally in terms of influence, one only has to look at the differences between the growth of employment in the San Francisco Bay Area and the growth of the number of housing units. As I have said to many people who are involved in the various debates involved in land use, that, you know something, all of those people that are moving into Mountain View to work at Google, they want to have beds and refrigerators and a barbecue and the rest of it, and we are not building households for them. So what is happening is people are doubling up. My nephew, who works in south of Market, is right now living in a dorm. He is living with an unrelated individual in a housing unit with 40 units, and he is spending $1,250 a month for an unrelated room. That is an example of a housing shortage. This is the example of the employment index, and one can see over time, with the exception of the recession in the 1980s, the California and the Bay Area economies have been growing faster. Why is that? We are going to spend a good deal of time as to why that's true. And then you look at this. This first bubble is known as a housing bubble. We all know about the housing bubble and the Great Recession in terms of what happened. Well, housing prices are going up again, and they look just like they did before, except this is not a housing bubble. This is a housing shortage. And they're fundamentally different, and we'll be talking about that. And then looking at the projections. And just so you know, underlying this graph is the dissertation of my father, who completed his studies at UC Berkeley in 1961, and his partner is the one who's doing the projections for the MTC and ABAG that are underlying Plan Bay Area. And what those projections show is not only do we have a housing shortage, but it's going to get worse, and it's going to get a lot worse. And you'll understand why that's true. And then finally, we'll be talking about traffic. And one of the things about blue economies and the environmental organizations in Marin and Sonoma County is they hate cars. They're anti-car as they drive to all the public meetings advocating, well, whatever particular thing that they want. And what I'll take you through is the economics of the automobile system in the United States. And one of the things people need to understand is automobiles are extraordinarily popular. People like them. They buy them. And so vehicle ownership rates have been increasing per household for 50 years in the United States. And unfortunately, I don't have one that shows Sonoma County, but it's also true in Marin County. Vehicle ownership rates are going up everywhere, and it's one of the reasons you see so many cars on the freeway. And then finally, we'll be discussing why is traffic congestion so incredibly difficult as an economic problem. Okay, it is a straightforward problem called the common property problem, which you learn about in economics. The highway system is a common property. We are not pricing it. It gets overutilized. It is no different than a fishery. It is no different than the air in terms of its economic structure. But go ahead as a politician and advocate that they should price the freeway. That will pretty much end your political career. And it brings together the reasons I like talking about it. It's not only personal that we're all stuck in the traffic jams constantly, but it's also because of the number of issues that are brought together when you start talking about this incredibly complicated problem, beginning with individual preferences and behaviors, embedded special interests, political beliefs, how to pay for the transportation system, the costs of the transportation system, the pricing of the common property resource, land use issues, and also overall the cost of driving. It makes it an extraordinarily interesting problem. And it makes it an extraordinarily complicated problem, particularly in the San Francisco Bay Area, where we are preserving land like crazy. We are facing a housing shortage, and I have been here for 50 years. As far as I can tell, traffic's only getting worse. And it's going to continue to get worse. The class is on Tuesday afternoons. I look forward to seeing you.
I gave him an extra minute because he did me a favor. Okay, so now this next day, Wednesdays, I'm going to call the day of Pied Pipers. One is a Pied Piper who has been with us for a long time and draws students in droves to all of his classes. And the other has only taught with us once so far, but had the highest subscribed class last term. So together, I think if you want to come to class on Wednesdays, get there early to get a good seat. We're going to start with our new Pied Piper, who has offered the Amazing Mind Rewiring Your Brain for Success class at Oakmont and is now bringing it here. He has his own radio show, and I think you're really going to enjoy him here at this campus. Stephen Campbell.
This is going to be so fun. Right now, while I'm talking to you, you're talking to yourself, gosh, hundreds of times faster, and your brain can do that because when I talk to you, I use words. But when you talk to yourself, you use pictures and feelings. So when I think of Mary, my wife, I don't think of her with words. I think of how I feel about her and how pretty she's become to me in the 46 years we've been married. So you really are talking to yourself far faster, but here's the important point. While you're talking to yourself, and this is brain breakthrough number 1, and we'll be talking about 4 of them during our 6 weeks. Brain breakthrough number 1 is that your brain believes everything you tell it. Ugh. That's scary and wonderful. The scary part is when you say, I just cannot do this. You know what your brain says? Okay. And then it makes sure you can't. But there's a wonderful part. When you say, I can do this, you know what your brain says to that? Okay. And then it becomes obsessed with finding ways to do it. Now, is what you're saying true? The brain doesn't even care. And my class is basically scientific. So we'll look at studies after studies, and the study that I love is Dr. Ramachandran's book, Phantoms in the Brain. Phantoms refer to phantom limbs that have been amputated. And the patient goes in, he says, you got to help me, and the doctor says, well, you cut off that arm 6 months ago, and the patient says, you didn't tell my brain that. My brain still thinks it's there. So the brain doesn't care whether what you're saying is true or not. Now, the person we're going to concentrate on is Dr. Albert Ellis, who started cognitive back in 1961. And what he suggested is brain breakthrough number 2. And that is everything you can do today is primarily based on what you say to yourself about yourself today. Now, when he suggested this, psychology had a conniption fit. They said, no, 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 the way you are today is because of unresolved childhood conflicts. That was Freudianism. That was followed by behaviorism. Dr. B.F. Skinner, Harvard University, he says, no, 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 it's all cause and effect. That was followed by it's on your genes. That didn't last too long. That was followed by it's in your environment. And Dr. Ellis came back and he said, you know what, they're all true. How could they all be true? Because when you say it, your brain makes it true when you lock onto it. So for the first 42 years of my life, I said to myself, I'm really dumb in math. And guess what? I was. Couldn't do numbers. But I discovered computers and got a computer graduate degree, and I began teaching computer courses. And the dean said, you're now teaching math, which flipped me out. But I needed the job. So I learned about brain-based learning, which I'll be sharing during my class, and I eventually ended up writing 2 college textbooks. And what do you think? Math. It was a matter of switching the message. And when you switch the message, the brain says, what? Okay. Is it true? Don't care. All I care is what you tell me. This gets exciting. Okay. Number 2, where do our self-images come from? Our self-images come from what you say to yourself about yourself. They are learned. You were not born with them, which means you can switch them. Whoa. Week 3, we then talk about goals that actually work. Most of our goals are, well, I will lose this weight, I will take that trip. And you know what your brain says to you when you say that? Hope you do. Sounds great. I'm going to go take a nap. Because I have no idea what's going to happen in the future, and the present is what I'm always concerned about. So we're going to talk about how to create goals that actually work. Hello. Number 4, we'll talk about the science behind affirmations. This class basically leads to affirmations, and affirmations most of all don't work for a number of reasons. We'll be talking about why they don't work. Specifically, though, I'll be showing you how they do and how they can. Wow. Okay, week number 5 leads us to breakthrough number 3, which is the most exciting one. Our feelings follow our beliefs. Did you know that your feelings about yourself did not come from how you were raised or events in your lives? You know where they come from? They come from your beliefs about how you were raised and your beliefs about events in your lives. And why is that so exciting? Because you can change those beliefs and your feelings follow. Wow. Week number 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, I get confused. Week number 4, here we go. This is the most exciting one. We can change the way we think. Wow. We'll look at the work of Dr. E.P. Seligman and his work on learned optimism. And the fact we can change what we are saying to ourselves about ourselves. And what does our brain say? Okay. Is it true? Don't care. All I care is what you tell me. Now, at the end of every course, what I do is I give you a new way of thinking. I'm sorry, at the end of every lesson, I give you a new way of thinking. I'm just going to give you one sort of example. This is from Stanford University back in 1975 called the effort effect. And what they discovered is that most of us pass over our successes too quickly, too lightly for them to ever become a part of who we are. So when someone says to us, good job, we say, well, not really. That's embarrassing. That's egotistical. I could have done better. And the problem with that is when you say that, what does your brain say? Okay. And those compliments fall to the floor. So here's your new way of thinking. And you'll be having 6 of these because there's 2 per class. 12, sorry. Your new way of thinking is this. I get confused. I get so excited. Okay, here we go. When someone says, good job, you look at them and you smile and you say, oh, you know what, that makes me feel really nice. Thanks for telling me that. And when you get by yourself, you wallow in your success like a pig in slop. I mean, you wallow in it. And what's the word about the brain? The brain just says what? Oh, okay. Is it true? Don't care. All I care is what you tell me. I'll be at the Cooperage on Wednesdays from 9. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you this part. We're going to go through about 500 slides. Fortunately, I've given this presentation to thousands, tens of thousands of people over the last 10 years. I have written down every word I say on the left and the slide on the right. So at the end of the class, if you give me your email, I will send you a PDF that has that particular day's lecture, slides on the right, words on the left. So you don't have to take notes. It'll always be there, plus the researches that I had. So it'll be a really fun time. Okay? Okay, Cooperage, Wednesday, July 10th to 14th. It's really fun.
Okay, so now to the other Pied Piper. How many of you have taken a class from Mick Chandler? Better question. How many of you have not taken a class from Mick Chandler? Okay, I would need only 2 hands to count that group. So I tasked Mick this time with coming up with a new topic that's a little bit of a deviation, but still right in his wheelhouse as a historian, and I think the title is very clever. He will now give you the Addams Family.
I want to extend a special welcome to the newcomers that are here for the first time and hope, as Karen said, that you'll become a part of our OLLI community. It is a lot of fun, as Stephen said. In the 6 weeks that I'll be teaching the Addams Family course, we're going to be examining the careers of 6 extraordinary New Englanders who left their mark on American history, perhaps as deeply as any other family dynasty in our nation's 250 years. I would put the Addamses in the same class as the Roosevelts in terms of their significance and influence, lasting influence on American history, the Kennedys, and the Bushes. The Addamses that we'll be looking at during our 6 weeks are, of course, the originators of the dynasty, John Adams, depicted here with his wife Abigail. And probably many of us know a fair amount about this couple, America's first power couple, you could say, because they collaborated in their political work as well as enjoying 58 years of a deep emotional and physical connection with one another. Abigail exerted a great deal of influence over John's thinking and also over his behavior, which was slightly different from his thinking. John is a very irascible, contrarian sort of figure, and you could say that Abigail helped to civilize him. And John's influence stretches from the Declaration of Independence all the way through the nation's critical crisis period of the late 1790s, when very easily the fragile new republic could have fallen apart. So John and Abigail will take us through the first 2 weeks of the course. We'll be looking at the young John Adams when he carves out a reputation in Boston as being an outside-the-box thinker of the first magnitude. He does things that really none of the other founding fathers are willing to do. He bucks public opinion and follows his own star at every opportunity, and this is going to create a lot of problems for him that Abigail has to reel him back in from the edge. He becomes our second president in 1797 at a time when America was threatened by hostile foreign influences. We could have easily gone to war with either France or Britain during his presidency, and he managed to steer us through those crisis years. Probably fewer of us are familiar with the, I feel, extraordinary career of his son, John Quincy Adams. John was not a terribly successful president for reasons that we'll examine in the course. His greatest impact comes after he leaves the White House and becomes the nation's premier crusader against slavery. He's the only American president who goes back to Congress after he is voted out of the White House. And it's in the Congress that he leads this rather, at the time, people thought, crazy and quixotic fight against the slave power, as he called it, the Southern power bloc that had monopolized the nation's political structures for the first 50 years or so of our history. Here we see Anthony Hopkins depicting John Quincy Adams. I think it's a remarkably effective adaptation in the movie Amistad, and we'll be talking about that landmark event in John's career during the fourth week of the course. 1 week we'll deal with Abigail and her daughter-in-law, Louisa. Most of us are reasonably familiar probably with Abigail, probably less so with Louisa, John Quincy's wife. But she in her own right is a remarkable figure. She is a proto-feminist in many ways that I think will fascinate particularly the women that take the course. But all of us, I think, would have to bow down in admiration to someone who was willing to go against the trends, the expectations for women in her time period as she did. Charles Francis will be the subject of week number 5. Someone, again, probably most of us don't know a great deal about, but we should, because it was Charles Francis who served as minister to England during the Civil War and did more than anyone to keep England on the sidelines during the Civil War. If England had entered into the fray on the side of the Confederacy, which is what Lincoln and most Northerners feared, probably the country would have not survived the war and we would have separated. But Charles Francis, for reasons that we'll see in week 5, exercises remarkable tact, diplomacy, and forceful rhetoric when necessary to keep England out. And then in week 6, I title it Henry Adams, What Does It All Mean? Henry Adams is the last of the Adamses that we'll be looking at in the course. He's not as well known as either his father, grandfather, or great-grandfather, but I'm going to argue in many ways he's a very, very significant post-Civil War American. He's a historian, of first-rate historian, sort of invents in a way, the way history is taught in colleges, a journalist, not an altogether likable man, but one who's very, very influential in political and cultural circles. So this is an extraordinarily interesting group of people. You will not necessarily like all the figures that we talk about in this class, but I'm sure you'll find them fascinating, and I'm sure you'll admire them. You don't have to be nice to be admired, do you? So I hope to see many of you in the class. It'll be Wednesday afternoon after Steve's morning class, and I think it'll be a good day for all of us.
Okay, so A quick note, I'd like to also, in addition to being one of our Pied Piper instructors, I want to thank Mick Chantler for being our current chair of the advisory board for OLLI and all that he's done in that capacity and will continue to do. So thank you, Mick. So moving from our resident U.S. historian to our resident European historian, typically when Bruce Elliott is teaching a class on France, I might introduce him in French. If he's teaching a course on Italy, he's asked me to introduce him in Italian. I don't really know what to do today, so I'm going to be rather pedestrian and introduce him in English. One of our earliest instructors and a loyal patron of the program, Bruce Elliott.
Good morning. Thanks for coming out and joining us here. I feel like it's kind of synchronistic that I get to come up right after Mick, because he's talking about a dynasty, and I've actually taught a class in the past here on great dynasties of European history. And the thing is that things have been going on recently that have been troubling, in the range between troubling and alarming. And it's kind of gotten me motivated. And I'd say that this course that I'm offering here is the most relevant course. Usually I'm teaching about things that happened hundreds of years ago. And I'm still going to be teaching about things that happened hundreds of years ago in many cases. But it has a relevance, a current relevance. There's sort of this question about autocracy. And autocracy, basically single persons, usually single male rule that has been the dominant political form over the centuries. Not just in the West, but of course all over the world. But at this point, really I could say it was something like when the Berlin Wall fell and when the Cold War ended, we thought, all right, this is the age of liberal democracy. And here we are, 2 or 3 decades later, and it's a very different landscape. So I've got this course that I'm doing on these great republics, rather than dynasties. The exceptions in history were the republics. And so we go week by week through the most prominent republics, the ones that were most successful in warding off autocracy. And we begin with Venice. And you've got the state house of Venice, of Doge's palace. Well, the Venetians were nervous about having a single figure, but they needed a single figure because they had to have a head of state. And so they had elected position, the Doge, and it was they set up the most rig-proof electoral process in history by far for the election of the Doge. And also, once the Doge got in, who was elected for life, they wanted to make sure that people didn't take him too seriously. So they came up with the most ridiculous-looking crown. And they made them wear it whenever they spoke. And sometimes when they would speak, and this is the Great Council, 2,000, sometimes 2,500 representatives who would really make all the appointments, all the government appointments and elections, including the election of the Doge. And then, in terms of, that was a little unwieldy for running day-to-day business and week-to-week business, and that was the Venetian Senate. That's really where the real power in Venice resided, not in the Doge, much more in the Venetian Senate. And just to make sure, because there were times when there were conspiracies to overthrow this republic, and an instrument was set up, the Council of 10, with absolute powers of judicial powers for security. Their full title was Council of 10 for State Security. And then you get art. One of the things that happen with these republics is they're grounds for creativity. It's kind of a constant you see in history with the republic, something about that, where it's a more diverse kind of patronage. You get a kind of creativity that comes forth. And you see, and in Venice, it's often in celebration of the Republic, in celebration of the Venetian state. We go to Florence, the other great Italian republic, the city-state republic. And here we have this sort of seat of government, and it's a palace. It's the one palace that is in Florence, but it's not a palace. It wasn't constructed as a palace for a ruler. It was constructed for a palace of the Signoria, which was really kind of the ruling body. And boy, did they moved around. Well, we'll talk about their system. It was an elaborate system, but they changed rulers, the ruling board, every 2 months, just to make sure that nobody got too used to rule. And then they have the Hall of the 500, where again, like in Venice, they have a distribution of power with that number of representatives. And then here you'd see the Signoria being addressed and considering the actual business, day-to-day sort of business. And then you get Cosimo de' Medici, this figure, this great Medici family. Well, Cosimo de' Medici was very much a supporter of the Republic. And enough so that when he died, he was on his tombstone was put Pater, father of the country. And however, by the time you get to his grandson, Lorenzo de' Medici, Lorenzo is much more seeking to exercise a kind of sole power. And there's a conflict between the Medicis and the Republic. Enough so that here's again the city house. Well, they put right at the entrance where people enter the state house a statue. And the statue we're rather familiar with. And we have associations with this statue, but what's not so well known is that this statue was what it was about. David was representing the Republic. Guess who was representing Goliath? The Medici. So that was part of that. Then you get to the Netherlands and the Dutch Republic, their state house, when they would meet in the different, the provinces, the 7 provinces of that republic. And for each of these republics, you have the founding fathers. And this was one of the founding fathers of the Dutch Republic that we'll be looking at. And actually, the Dutch, when they formed the Republic, it was part of the revolt against Spain, which held that territory. And this is a painting done of the King of Spain, who's talking to the head of the House of Orange, William of Orange, and going, how come you're not keeping better control? How come they're having this revolt in your territory? And he goes, you know, I'm not a monarch. I'm just a governor. And that was the case. And then just relative to this cultural flowering, the Dutch Golden Age takes place in this time period, and you get Rembrandt really representing a kind of scene that's an evocation of the citizen participation in this. You go to Britain, where you have a monarchy, you have a parliament from medieval times, you have a parliament checking the power of the monarchs there. But there gets to be a clash in the 1600s, really where you have a ruler, Charles I, the Stuart king, who sought to bring autocracy to Britain. And it occasioned a civil war. Religion was involved as well, but you get Charles I versus Cromwell, who was a great defender of the Republic. Enough so that he gets offered the crown at a point after there had been attempts at creating different constitutional forms. And after long soul searching, he refuses the crown. About 25, 30 years later, you get what's known as the Glorious Revolution, where William and Mary, as a condition to become monarchs, had to accept the English Bill of Rights, which established the principle of parliamentary sovereignty, not monarchical sovereignty. And you get by the 1800s, you get the British developing the first kind of universal electorate in Europe. And then you get, in France, the Ancien regime, the ultimate of the monarchs, the ultimate of autocracy in Western history, and that comes apart with the French Revolution. And we'll be with the tennis court oaths and these principles, liberté, égalité. What happened to this? Believe me, it's supposed to be liberty, equality, and brotherhood. So we'll just leave it at that. That's fascinating. Migration. All right. You got a National Assembly being created in the First French Republic, and really kind of what we'll be looking at, focusing at, is 3 French republics, first, second, and third. And in a way, because they each had challenges that they were addressing in creating a governmental form that would hold power distributed. Then they get a certain challenge. Napoleon, a defender. Napoleon called himself, I am a son of the revolution. I am a strong advocate of the republic. However, it's a little dangerous when you have heroes become a head of state, because sometimes it kind of goes to their head. So you get the irony that here you get Louis XVI in 1786. 20 years later, Napoleon basically declares himself emperor. So it's how you ward this off. And so the French needed more revolutions. There was such a strong pull towards autocracy that they had a whole series. They got really good at revolutions. And they each set up republics. And then we get our founding fathers. And when they were framing the Constitution, in this constitutional convention, what they were looking at is, what were these previous republics? How did they pull it off? How did they defy the law, I would say the political gravitational law of movement towards autocracy? And so we'll be looking at what they were considering, the constitution they came up with, we the people, it's the beginning, not me the sovereign, we the people. And I guess what's something I want to say is that really, as we'll be going session by session, we're going to be pulling back a little bit and going, with these, what were the challenges this particular republic faced? And in what way might it be analogous with challenges that exist today? And then, sort of corresponding to that, what were the strategies that were employed, developed in each of these cases? And might there be applicability? Might that be useful in terms of coming up with an effective safeguard against autocracy? So if I can say, long live the Republic. Thank you. I hope I see you in class.
All right. I was going to come tap him on the shoulder, but I thought he might throw his hat at me, so I didn't. Okay, so finally, how many of you have heard of the Buck Institute in Novato? Okay, so they do research on aging, and for a long time we have wanted to have someone from the Buck Institute teach a class here at Ollie. So we were very fortunate to have a postdoctoral fellow from the Buck Institute apply to teach a class here, and as we welcome her to the Ollie family for the first time, I don't think I'm betraying a confidence that she will be welcoming a new member to her family in the spring, and she's going to spend her last couple of months before that child arrives with us. I'm very grateful and delighted to welcome Chung Hee.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It's really my great honor to join the Ollie program. I feel like I have a sexy topic here, because really doesn't really matter what you do, you care about this, right? Or at some point of your life, you will care about it. Just wanted to give you an introduction about myself. I was born and raised in China, in Beijing. I studied biology and chemistry when I was an undergrad. And also I got a PhD studying drug design for inflammation disease. So about 6 years ago, so the CEO, he used to be the CEO of the Buck Institute. His name is Brian Kennedy. So he went to my university in Beijing, and he gave us a talk about aging. I was really fascinated by this field. So I came up and I said, hey, since I'm working on drug design, maybe we can work together and we figure out a magic pill that we can slow down aging someday. And that was my goal. That was the reason that I came here. And we accomplished something in 2014. So there was a paper published from my lab, I'm the first author. So this is about how ibuprofen might hold some secrets about to slow down aging. So really the goal, the motivation for me teaching here is because there's so many misunderstanding and so many misleading in this aging field. So when I talk to someone that I study aging, and people will be kind of surprised, and then well, this is some question that I like that people ask me. So if you ask me, should I take ibuprofen? Or like, what should I do to prevent aging? I'll be happy to answer that. But there's some questions that people ask about me, something like, why don't you study individual disease like Alzheimer? Why did you study aging? Or some people ask me, well, I don't want you to keep me older but sick. This is some misunderstanding about the aging study. This is not our goal. Our goal is trying to keep you healthy longer. We don't want it to further extend your lifespan without giving you healthy. And another question a lot of people ask me, it really kind of made me want to teach this course, because there's a lot of newspapers, a lot of press, media news that you read. They're always misleading. So something like this. So study shows that the runners live longer. So does it mean that running can slow down aging? What is the problem of this conclusion? Is it a correlation or is it causation? Right? So this is a question that we always see in the title of the news, but sometimes they're not correct. Or there are other questions that people ask me, well, my neighbor says drinking or eating these products actually make me feel healthier. Should I do this? So what is wrong with those kind of statement? So we're gonna address those kind of general terms in scientific field. So the reason that we care about aging is because aging are the main driver for all the chronic disease that we suffer from. So well, probably everybody can name some of those chronic disease. You know, the Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, diabetes, heart disease, so on, cancer, so on and so forth. So apparently, when your age gets increased, the risk of getting those diseases, they're increased exponentially. So if you go to NIH webpage, they will tell you, well, the #1 risk factor for heart disease is high cholesterol, which I agree with that. If you have high cholesterol, your risk of getting heart disease is probably going to be three times higher than a regular person. But aging is actually can increase the risk of getting heart disease by 15-fold. So it's much higher than high cholesterol. And not only about that, so all of those diseases we care about, aging is the #1 driver. So that's why we wanted to focus on something that is in common. What if we can solve that what drives them? Maybe we can preventing them from happening. So here is what we wanted to do. So let's say this is your life. You're born, and at some point you get sick and you die. I'm sorry, your life probably more vivid than this, but let me simplify it this way. So in our United States, our healthcare system, we claim that we do healthcare, but we don't. We actually do sick care, right? People don't care about prevention. So you go to a doctor when you already get sick, and the doctor trying to put the puzzle together to you. So we call it, this is a disease approach. It doesn't really delay the onset of your mobility, right? So this approach actually makes you sick longer. So that's why you're suffering. So what we really wanted to do is that we wanted to give you something when you're still fairly healthy, when you can still get up and play golf, when you can still go traveling, when you can still go to all the courses. We wanted to give you something when you're still fairly healthy, and we wanted to extend that period of time. So we call that extend health span. So we wanted to slow down your mobility and increase life, maybe just a byproduct of it. We don't really care. We really care about this, your quality of your life. So you might want to ask, can we do that? can scientists actually do that? So let me just give you one example. Hopefully those video can move. Oh, okay, I promise there was video here. But don't worry, if you go to my class, I will show you the real video. They're mice, right? So they're mice actually taking a drug called rapamycin. So mice usually, their lifespan is about 2-3 years old. So they take rapamycin because study shows that rapamycin not only can make the mice live longer, but also can make the mice live healthier. So those are the mice that's taking rapamycin. Those are the mice that's in our control group. So if you don't see they're moving, but believe me, the phenomenon is that what we see, they're really old mice. They're about 85-year-old person. So when mice get old, they also develop some disease that humans get. So actually, those two guys, one of them is suffering from sarcopenia. So this guy cannot walk very well. This guy is actually suffer from a tumor. So they don't, just by looking at how they walk, you can tell they're not very healthier. But the top panel, they are the mice that taking rapamycin, and they still have no sign of tumorigenesis, and they're still pretty energetic. So in this course, it's going to be 6 weeks. I'm really excited to share my knowledge and my experience in this aging field. So what I'm going to cover in the week number 1, I'm going to give you guys a general introduction about this course, and also I'm going to talk some very simple statistic concept where you can use to actually interpret the news that you're going to read, or interpret some fact that you're going to hear about. And then on week 2, we're going to talk about aging study use animal models, and also the very, very fancy tool of genetic engineer. And then on week 3, we're going to talk about some aging theory. So one of the aging theory is called dietary restriction. So apparently, in mice or even human study, people found if you dietary restrict yourself, well, if you only eat 70% of your diet, then you're going to have a healthier, longer life. So is that correct? We're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about diet and how microbes in your gut that can affect aging and your health. And then on week 4, we're going to talk about some aging theory that is DNA damage or senescence. So that means like your cell can be programmed to be dead, but they're really not dying, but they can affect your health. And also circadian rhythm, so which it means is a biological clock, and how does that clock make you healthier or make you sick. And on week 5, we're going to talk about a very fascinating cutting-edge technology. So it's the stem cells, it's called stem cells and regenerative medicine. And then week 6, everyone care about week 6 because we're going to talk about how to reverse aging with drugs or some other interventions. So I hope to see you guys in the class. Thank you very much.
Okay, so what a lineup, right? So now you have the hard job. You have to deliberate and decide how you want to spend 6 weeks of your life in January and February with us. I'd like to thank all of the instructors for fantastic presentations. I'd like to thank all of the volunteers that contribute to the work of OLLI, and our donors, and of course the Bernard Osher Foundation. Without their initial support, this program would not exist. Mr. Osher himself turned 90 this year, and I think this program is a wonderful reflection of his continued vitality. I would like to thank all of you for being here as the lifeblood of this program, because without you, we would not exist. This is a family and a community, as I think you've heard from everyone here today, and I'm delighted to be a part of that. I wish you all a warm, healthy, peaceful holiday season, and we will see you in January. Thank you.